Yeah, welcome back. The minimum invasive cardiac surgery is minimally invasive for patient, but it is very invasive from anesthesiologist perspective. So it's my privilege to invite Dr. Rajesh Arya, an eminent cardiac anesthesiologist who needs no introduction. He's so efficiently managing the AECTA Echo Library, and he is board certified in Career of TE by various boards, and he's the past chief editor of AECTA Echo Library. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Anand, for these kind words. I thank Dr. Murli and the organizers to giving me a chance to speak on something which in my hospital we do regularly. And this is my institute. It's a part of Dayanand Medical College, one of the 10 best medical colleges in the private setup in India, rated by the government agencies. And our institute is this picture you're seeing is a cardiac center cardiac unit of our medical college. And this is a team of our young, enthusiastic, and energetic cardiac surgery and anesthesia team. Uh, Starting my presentation, this is what it used to be in the earlier, how the operation theater used to look like. And with the development of technologies, improvement, we have reached to this stage where everything looks covered and there is some space, hardly some spaces left for the people to sit, and all the machines have taken over the space. Minimal invasive cardiac surgery. Why do we need this? There are certain advantages, like there is decreased length of stay in the hospital because the surgical time is, surgical incision is small. There is less surgical trauma. There is reduced pain and reduced stress response. There is improved patient satisfaction. There's potential reduced hospital resource utilization. There's wound healing becomes better, and there is reduced blood transfusion because the surgical site is, the site of incision is less. But there are certain disadvantages also because it takes a lot of operation room time and decreases the surgical exposure, and there is a significant learning curve. One has to take time and time to reach to the curve that they become expert in doing this operation. Uh, the things have evolved over a time. As we know, the evolution is a continuous process. First, it came as a minimal invasive mitral valve surgery. Then they started doing minimal invasive coronary artery bypass grafting on a beating heart. Then they started in 1996. They started doing minimal invasive valve replacement surgeries. Then Chitwood clamp came into practice, and that allowed the surgeons to go transthoraically and occlude the aorta and make the surgery possible. Then came the robotics, and Da Vinci system was very famous in early from early 2000 onwards, and later on the minimal invasive surgery was used by the cardiologists also, probably with the help of surgeons with Cox-Maze procedures. When I went through the literature, I found there are a lot of literature, and this is one of the best meta-analysis where they've found that a lot of this minimal invasive surgeries and practice, and a lot of scenarios they've compared with cardioplegia, without cardioplegia, and they found that okay, this is a good procedure. So what is the present clinical application of minimally invasive surgery? As you can see that a small hole is created on the side of the chest or some other place, and instead of going through the routine thoracotomy, with a small incision surgery is done, and with that surgeons are able to replace the wall. CABG, congenital heart defect, especially the atrial septal defect. There is high risk patients sometimes are electively taken for minimal invasive surgery, so that the post-operative period becomes smooth and the complications of a sternotomy and ventilation are reduced. Then sometimes surgery is done by mini AVR or MVR with stenting, and robotic surgery is always a fancy and a glory for the surgeons to do. And these are the different procedures which are performed through which the minimal invasive surgery is performed. So instead of going for a sternotomy, a small incision is placed at some other place, and this is how what it looks on a clinical on the operation table. And through this hole only, they have to perform whatever the surgery they have planned for that patient. So we anesthesiologists are present, and we are expected to be a third eye for the surgeon, and we are now they call us as a perioperative echocardiographer as well, because transesophageal echo has given us a chance that we can see what is happening inside and what all things are there. So what an anesthesiologist is supposed to do? He's supposed to confirm the diagnosis, what the transthoracic or perioperative diagnosis the patient comes with, we need to help the surgeon for cannulation. We need to help them in cardioplegia delivery system. We should look for any complication which can happen because of the surgery or because of the other things. And our echo works as a monitor and guide the surgical steps. And we become a watchman for the surgeon, that what is happening inside, because through the small hole they can't see the entire heart, what is going inside. So first question is asked by the surgeon moment they enter the theater, and our TE probe is inside, and the anesthesiologist is performing a comprehensive exam. The first question asked by the surgeon is, are we okay to go with the minimal invasive surgery in this patient? By asking this question, he needs a concrete answer from us, whether this patient has any contraindication which doesn't let the minimal invasive surgery to continue, or he has to change his plan of minimal invasive surgery. For example, if you find the patent foramen ovale, probably the mitral valve replacement in that patient may not be that smooth. If there is sinus venosus ASD, if there is left superior vena cava, they have to change their circuit system in a way that they can drain the left side of the upper thorax and the left arm. Are there any partial anomalous venous connection? Is there any aortic regurgitation which won't allow them to put the cardioplegia antegrade and they have to do something? Or are there atheromatous plaque which doesn't let them to put the aortic cannula in the femoral or other places? So all these questions are addressed to us. And as a basic examination, these are the major things we see, and then we tell the surgeon, okay, we can go ahead. These things are not there or they are there, and how to change the plan. So with this basic information to the surgeon, we we work as a T for the guide of various cannulation, like he has to go on pump or do some procedure, so that he needs our help to put the various cannulas in the heart. And normally, as we know, the aortic cannula is placed in thoracotomy on the midline chest, and then the venous cannulas are placed, and we go on the bypass, and then we caress the heart. But here, there are certain different, the situation is different, because surgeons sometimes go on the femoral cannula, like femoral arterial and venous, or they may go for the arterial cannula to be placed in the central aorta after a thoracotomy or a minimally invasive incision. There are various change in the plan, like he might go for the femoral or axillary cannulation. There may be bicaval cannulation, single venous cannulation, SVC and IVC cannulation separately through the incision site or from the interjugular vein and the femoral vein. So all sort of combinations or permutations are tried, best suitable to that particular patient. But definitely they need an answer by us, whether they are able to give the cardioplegia properly through the coronary sinus or antegradely. And apart from that, we need to secure our central line and see the position of our central lines, so that they don't interfere the surgical field, and they don't come in the surgical field. So first of all, let's see the aortic cannulation, because that's the first cannulation is performed in whenever the cardiopulmonary bypass system is to be used. So we need to see the guide wire in the aorta, because most ideal method of placing the aortic cannula is to slide over the guide wire so that it remains in the lumen properly. T helps in to evaluate the aortic atheromas. If there are atheromas, we need to tell the surgeon where to puncture and whether to go antegrade or retrograde or femoral, axillary or central cannulation. And once the surgeon is placing the aortic line, we need to see with our echo whether there is any dissection, rupture, or any other complication. But there's certain limitations of the TE. We cannot see the femoral axillary cannulation site with echo probe. The echo probe doesn't go beyond at the most to the renal vessels. We cannot see beyond the renal vessels with the transesophageal probe. And obviously, we cannot see the axillary artery also on the transesophageal probe. So we need to depend on other methods. So coming to the main thing, let us see how it looks. We have a two scenario. In this scenario, the aorta is absolutely fine. There is no atheroma. And long axis, short axis, both it looks well. But if you see this video, there are a lot of atheromas in the aorta, grade 3, grade 4 atheroma, and sometimes you will find there are mobile atheromas as well. So if you find this situation, you need to put a question mark to the surgeon. Probably he should not do the femoral cannulation, and he should change the plan. So once we have confirmed that aorta is fine, then we need to see the guide wire in the aorta. This is long axis, this is short axis, and you can see the guide wire in the short axis in the lumen of the aorta. So once you confirm with echo that the guide wire is right in the lumen of the aorta, and you allow the surgeon to pass his cannula or slide his cannula over the guide wires, and there is smooth in the placement of cannula in the aortic line. The same thing you can see that the long axis, there's a guide wire here, and this guide wire is still in the lumen. So comfortably you can tell the surgeon, okay, your line is in the aorta, and second, your line is properly in the aorta, and there is no complication. But the problem comes when the surgeon is putting the line in the axillary artery, through axillary artery. So it becomes more prominent, more important to make sure that the guide wire from the axillary artery is coming in the aorta. So this is deep transgastric view, and this is one of my favorite view in which I increase the depth of the sector. If you see the depth of the sector is 20 centimeter, increase the depth and rotate the probe in a way the entire aortic arch is visible. So once you can see the aortic arch in this view and surgeon passes the guide wire, you can see the guide wire coming from the axillary artery into the aorta, and then he can slide his cannula on the guide wire. And as you can see, this is axillary artery. This is the aortic cannula coming from the axillary artery into the aortic lumen. One must be very sure that your axillary arterial cannula is in the lumen, because it might go to the common carotid, might go to other side, and once you go on pump, you are in a fix what is happening, because the heart is not perfused, the rest of the body is not perfused. So must make sure that your axillary artery cannula is in the central aorta. And this is one of the pictures sent by Dr. Priya Menon, and I just with the request I've used it. This is how you can see the central aortic annulation on echo as well. You can see the heart, the flow of blood is towards the probe. It means the blood is flowing from the cannula towards the aorta. This is aorta, and this is a cannula. So the blood flow is in this direction towards the aorta as we have initiated the cardiopulmonary bypass. So after the central aortic annulation is done, we go for the echo check. In this presentation, what are the procedure we do? I have noted down that you should go for an echo check. In this echo, you must answer this question. We have to rule out the dissection. We have to rule out perforation. We have to check for direction of flow, especially in axillary cannulation. We should look for the length of cannula inside the aorta and axillary cannulation. And we must make sure when the perfusist is requested to give some fluid into the aorta through this aortic line, there should be free flow of that fluid into the aorta. Okay, you request the perfusist to give 50-100 ml fluid, and you make sure that the fluid is coming freely and there is no turbulence and no obstruction, no dissection, as we see on the echocardiography. Second issue is the management of cardioplegia. Because in minimal invasive surgery, there is always a issue whether to go antegrade cardioplegia, whether to go for retrograde cardioplegia. We need to see the coronary sinus properly under TE guidance. And is their aortic wall competent? Because if the aortic wall is not competent, we cannot give antegrade cardioplegia, because the LV will dilate, and we have no access to the LV to decompress it once it is arrested. And again, we have to see for the main coronary vessels. So this is a video you can see. The ECG is flat, it means the heart is arrested. Antegrade cardioplegia is given, and there is competent aortic wall which is not letting the cardioplegia going to the left ventricle, and it goes to the coronary vessels. And to confirm this, whether it is going to the coronary vessels properly and is generating enough pressure in the aortic root, we look at the coronary sinus and we see that there is flow of cardioplegia in the coronary sinus as well. So this is the coronary sinus view, and blue color flow in this direction shows that the blood is coming, cardioplegia is coming from the coronary osteas to the myocardium and back to the coronary sinus and draining to the right atrium. So if you are able to establish this much of sequence of cardioplegia running from aorta to the coronary sinus, we are sure that the delivery is proper and the heart is arrested properly. But sometimes you need to give retrograde cardioplegia also. And this is another picture where you find this mild degree of aortic regurgitation when the cardioplegia is given. So at that time, you must keep on watching that if the LV is distending or not, because if LV distends, the surgeon won't get space to work, and again, it will be harmful for the myocardial protection. Now, this is retrograde cardioplegia, and you can see this is a coronary sinus view. This is how the coronary sinus looks, and you can appreciate vaguely probably the shining thing inside the coronary sinus. That is the retrograde cardioplegia cannula. you must make sure the position, the flow of blood into the coronary cannula, and finally draining of the coronary veins into the coronary sinus. Especially the right coronary vein, which is many a time obstructed by the balloon of the cannula, should be avoided, and you can guide the surgeon to withdraw or push the cannula a little bit more so that the coronary vein draining into coronary sinus are not obstructed. So again, the echo check, we must make sure that the cannulation is proper and free of complication. We must position the retrograde cannula in the coronary sinus. We look for LV distension, antegrade cardioplegia draining to coronary sinus, retrograde cardioplegia draining to the aortic root. When you're giving the retrograde cardioplegia, you can check in the aortic wall short axis view that both the coronary arteries are draining back into the aortic root. You can see the blood coming from the right coronary ostia and blood coming from the left main coronary ostia back to the aortic root if retrograde cardioplegia is given. And at the end of the day, you must make sure there is no coronary artery dissection, because that is one of the very bad situation. If there is any dissection, you hardly can do anything. You have to go on the total circulatory arrest to repair it. Now, second issue is venous cannulation issue. On venous side, we have certain issues related to this minimal invasive surgery, that is presence of LSVC, ASD, TAPVC, incision wall, large coronary sinus, position of cannula in the RV and or coronary sinus, and we need have enough space for the snugger which the surgeons apply on the SVC and IVC. So let's see a few examples and a few videos related to this. This is a mediasophageal bicaval view in which we can see the guide wire going into the right atrium, over which the surgeon can float his venous cannula. Venous cannula may be a single venous cannula or a single stage cannula or double stage cannula. And this is how the cannula is placed over this guide wire. And we can see the position of cannula, the tip of the cannula, and whether it is draining properly or not. Sometimes we find there is an eustachian wall, and this eustachian wall may not allow the surgeon to put the cannula into the inferior vena cava. So we need to guide the surgeon, and if it is really obstructing the IVC flows, we should tell the surgeon. Probably you will find difficulty in putting the IVC cannula, and under echocardiography guidance, you can direct him that where the cannula is going, because many times the wall directs the cannula to the coronary sinus, which is a very, very bad situation if that happens, because the large size of the IVC cannula may damage the coronary sinus. Then again, this is a IVC cannula. In this patient, the wire is coming from the inferior vena cava and going towards the superior vena cava, and the surgeons can put a long cannula starting from the IVC, and with the wire going to a SVC, they can direct the cannula towards the SVC so that both the vena cava are drained properly. And you can see how the cannula looks and how we can check the drainage of fluid into the venous cannula. We can position the cannula. Now, when we are putting a femoral cannula from the femoral vein, we need to keep the cannula within the IVC or subdiaphragmatic part of the IVC. I mean to say by that the cannula tip should not come in the right atrium, because the surgeons need to snug the right atrium. So in this video, if you see, the cannula has come into the right atrium, but we request the surgeon that to withdraw the cannula a few centimeters. And if you see here, this is the IVC RA junction, and we requested the surgeon to withdraw the cannula so that they can put the snugger here, so that they can maintain a airtight cardiopulmonary bypass. Similarly, when you are putting the cannula from RA side to the IVC, we have to make sure that there is no venous obstruction. The hepatic veins are not obstructed. The flow of hepatic vein is smooth, and the cannula itself is not pressing on the hepatic vein and obstructing the flow of hepatic vein. And the best way to judge is that you put a pulse Doppler on the hepatic vein and check the flows. If the flows are perfect and the waveforms are ACV waveforms are there, you're comfortable and your cannula is not pressing on the hepatic veins. So again, the echo check, you look for the hepatic vein flows. 10% incidence of right hepatic vein cannulation is there. So you make sure that the IVC cannula is not in the hepatic vein. You put the cannula in the coronary sinus, check for that. Cannula in the hepatic vein, there may be some kinking of the cannula and the positioning of the cannula. So all this should be checked whenever the IVC cannulation is performed by the surgeon. Now coming to the superior vena cava cannulation. Most of the time it is done on the Saldinger's technique, like many a time we anesthetists do it. After induction, we scrub and we put the cannula through the intrajugular vein. Or most important is we have to keep the tip of the cannula 2 centimeter above the SVC-RA junction. The same reason, to maintain a airtight cardiopulmonary bypass, surgeon has to snug the SVC-RA junction, and we have to provide the space for the surgeon so that he can snug it and open the right atrium. If our cannula is inside the right atrium, he may not be able to snug it. So this is a video where the guide wire is placed from the superior vena cava towards the right atrium. And over this guide wire, you can see the cannula being floated over the guide wire. Okay, and now the tip of the cannula is very much inside the right atrium. This is not a desired situation. This is not the condition we want. We want that we should not be able to see the cannula in the right atrium at any cost. So we request the surgeon to withdraw the cannula, and this is the right atrium RA junction. He has withdrawn the cannula, and then we make sure that at least this is around 1 to 1.5 centimeter above the SVC-RA junction, so that they can drain the upper extremity. And this allows the surgeon to put a clamp also, or snug the SVC-RA junction also. So once you are this much above the level of SVC-RA junction, we are comfortable, and the surgeon can go ahead with the cardioplegic arrest. So again, this video shows how the cannula is placed and how we measure the distance. So sometimes the central venous cannulation itself can create a problem. This is our central line which is coming to the RA. So we don't want that central line should be seen in the RA when the surgeon opens the right atrium. So we withdraw the central line also and keep it at least 1 to 1.5 centimeter above the SVC-RA junction. So, and the echo check after the SVC cannulation, we look for the length of the central line, we look for the congenital abnormalities, we look for the SVC cannula and CPB circuit, and we check space for the SVC snugger. And sometimes when we go on pump, this cannula, they slide because the heart becomes empty. They slide inside the right atrium. So we have to make sure that they are enough above the SVC-RA junction. And post CPB, many times we find the surgeon suture, they take the central line in the suture and it is tied and it is taken as a knot with the suture. So we have to make sure that our central line is not in the surgeon suture, and we flush the solution and we try to pull it, and we find we should be making sure that it is not struck by the surgeon. So immediately after post bypass, as in routine in any case, we go for the routine regional wall abnormalities. We look for de-airing. We look assessment of the surgical procedure about the wall, whether it's functioning well or the defect, if it is repaired, whether it's repaired properly or not, and we look for various gradients and the flow patterns. Apart from cannulation, some in minimal invasive surgery, sometimes in case we need to put the IABP, so this helps us to place the IABP properly, and we can see, if we can see the opening of left upper pulmonary vein, we are confident that the balloon is below the left upper pulmonary vein. We should not be seeing the IABP in the if we are looking, if we can see the pulmonary vein, left upper pulmonary artery. I'm sorry. Left upper pulmonary artery, left upper left limb vessel. If we are able to see, we should not be able to see the balloon in that.
Left subclavian.
Left subclavian. Thanks for helping me out. Left subclavian. We should be able to see the. If we see left subclavian, we should not see the IABP in that view. Okay. These are. I mean, this is what I mean to say. If we are able to see left subclavian, the IABP is not seen, so we are comfortable. Our IABP is well placed, and you can see the IABP pulsation. And I just happy to quote these. We have done two cases where patient had a complete cut down of descending thoracic aorta, and patient required IABP. So we put the IABP through the axillary artery into the upper part of above the level of block. And if you see, this is aortic arch short axis view. This aortic arch, this is pulmonary artery, and you can see IABP in the aortic arch. This is one of the rare cases we have done in our institute. These are a few references and guidelines. I think I can skip this because there is nothing I can say that it is not. Minimal invasive cardiac surgery is very much in practice. So I would say that there was an era then when the BMV or CMV were done, and during BMV, the echo became the third eye to the cardiologist. As you can see that they're trying to puncture the interventricular septum, and we have reached to an era where left ventricular assist device is placed, and still we need we need transesophageal echocardiography. So the role of T has traveled a long journey from BMV or CMV to left ventricular assist device, and it has proved with time its importance. That is very much a required tool. We must have a good knowledge and practice of handling the instrument and the machine. So I conclude that in T so a question was asked, is T important of minimal invasive cardiac surgery? And I say yes, it is not important. It is essential for minimal invasive cardiac surgery. So pre-operatively, it's a diagnostic tool, it's a monitoring tool, and it's a guide to surgeon. A comprehensive T examination is must, because you never know when you get the surprises inside the operation theater. It provides a baseline, comprehensive exam provides a baseline information to the surgeons and the entire team in the operation theater, and we rule surprises. So I conclude by saying that T provides safe and secure environment to proceed for minimal invasive cardiac surgery. And I must thank all the organizers that they gave me a chance to speak on this topic, which is routinely done our place. And a few words about Corona. So what is Corona? The child's expression says, I don't know what is Corona. So we looked around in the sky, we looked around here and there, and we searched the entire Google. We have no answer. And this is one of the sort of mission statement given by our institute's head, Dr. Wander, and he published in article in the paper also, newspaper also, that Corona has taught us to accept and say, I don't know. So I don't know, we were intellectuals never saying it, but Corona has taught us to say that we don't know, and we should accept and say it out, I don't know, when we don't know. So whatever it may be, just relax and enjoy the next presentation. Thank you.